Hey there everybody, Brian Von Vier here. In D&D, what makes a god a god? They don't seem to meet the characteristics which define the traditional Judeo-Christian god: omnipotence, omniscience, or omnibenevolence. Okay, so it's important to understand that there are other religions than the Abrahamic ones. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam define their single deity as omnipotent, omniscient, and so on, and that's fine for them. But the vast majority of religions don't subscribe to that view. In most religions, a god is a supernatural entity. Often, though, not necessarily immortal. The Norse gods, for example, are eventually slated to die, but not until Ragnarok, with responsibilities for various moral and or natural aspects of the cosmos, which may range from abstract concepts like justice and family to very concrete things like the sun and even geographical locations like specific mountains or rivers. Want a good harvest? Petition the god of harvests with suitable prayer and sacrifice, and you're more likely to get a good harvest. Want to get married? Go talk to the god of love. Now, in RPGs and the like, what distinguishes a god from some other entity? Well, there can be a very gray area. Traditional African religions illustrate this nicely. In these traditions, there's often a hierarchy of supernatural entities ranging from the spirits of one's ancestors, who are easily engaged to help you with your problems, but aren't that powerful. Though somewhat more distant entities in charge of larger forces, storms, the hunt, etc., who are more powerful but less inclined to get involved, all the way up to some immensely powerful creators who are both hugely powerful and almost impossible to involve in your affairs. Alright, so at what point in this hierarchy do we go from long-lived nature spirits and family ghosts into actual gods? Well, there's no hard line. The very distinction is, in many traditions, one imposed from the outside. There can be many different answers depending on the culture or fictional context. Maybe gods are immortal and other spirits can fade away. Maybe gods have unique creative capabilities, or will always defeat non-gods in any contest. Maybe there's no distinction, and it's a line we just have to draw arbitrarily somewhere. Whatever the case, it's really, really important to understand that there are many different ways of thinking about gods, not just the Abrahamic one. Most fantasy goes back to the Greek era kind of gods, with a multitude of more fleshed out, fallible, and bickering gods that both create and resolve issues with their intervention of both direct and indirect nature. They create children or aid champions that resolve issues or resolve the issues themselves. And most of those issues are also created. It makes for better storytelling to have a bunch of non-omnipotent gods instead of just one that is supposed to resolve everything but just doesn't. The issue with omnipowers is that they should completely resolve everything. And when there's an actual being with these powers with actual involvement in the plot, they just resolve things themselves, or make it impossible to defeat a foe. Then what will the protagonist do? Why would they even be involved? And, of course, you can't really have multiple omniscient gods without them starting to contradict or nullify each other. For D&D, what makes a god is essentially a very powerful being that becomes even more powerful through worship. D&D is a mess when it comes to the lore of the gods. No matter if you use all the lore or just from one edition, you'll find that there's no one coherent answer. No, really. Even when sticking to a single edition and finding hard-written rules on what the gods actually are, or how they work, that same edition will have at least one or two events that directly contradict that rule. This is because the writers don't really care for the rules that are just vaguely established, not when it contradicts with whatever they want the system to be at the moment for their current story. While there are vague outlines, this has resulted in there being no hard rules for what gods are, and instead, they are kind of just whatever is required per situation or individual. The closest thing to a rule is that the gods require worshippers. Someone can become a god through gaining a lot of worshippers and being granted a domain, and when they lose all their worshippers, they die. There's a divine spark that makes gods both a finite resource and is tied to this death by lack of worship, but this is only vaguely described. Both the spark and the general vagueness of how one becomes a god prevents one from becoming a god through worship alone, which is good, as these restrictions are actually pretty low. When they were writing the rules of how many worshippers a god needs, the lesser ones just need a few thousand. And a random king can get that many people idolizing him, thus becoming a god simply for being king and not being terrible. In the same vein, greater races like giants and dragons would have turned humans into a zeal fuel in the Stone Age, if just worship could make any dragon with a horde of worshippers a god. There's something about the overlord of a setting, but I ignore this part of the lore entirely. AO only exists when requiring a hand-wave explanation for something that doesn't make sense, or just has to happen, which is, well, lazy handwriting. He doesn't seem to get involved in dishing out divinity, but one could say that he is filling in for vagueness between a popular hero and a hero turning into a god. Well, in the end, it's mostly worship and having a theme that makes a god. Kinda. Except for the many expectations, such as the gods without worshippers, or gods that came to be before mortals existed to worship, or gods that are also primordials, etc. It's all a cluster. The Judeo-Christian and Islamic gods are very late comers to the pantheon of the world's gods. Because of this, it's difficult to say that a god needs omnipotence, omnipresence, or omniscience. Omnibenevolence is a trait I haven't heard of a thing being attributed to a god, and I'm not sure it's applicable. The biblical God is willing to punish sinners, so I don't really see that as benevolence. He's good, yes, but omnibenevolent? Not really. But these aren't traits a god needs to be a god. Most gods don't actually inhabit these traits. In either case, Dungeons & Dragons has many settings with many different pantheons. The most common one is the gods in the Forgotten Realms. These are in large parts inspired by older religions such as the Hellenic, Roman, Egyptian, and Norse, among others. In the polytheistic religions, each god rules over different domains they represent the human condition. Since these are dead religions, we often have a skewed view of what they represented. We tend to boil it down a little too much. The gods of old were quite complex characters who lived in a magical part of the world where they did many different things. When they were bored, they'd bother the humans, get humans to do things for them, and so on. The stories being told about them are stories exploring human emotions and behavior. Not really unlike the Bible. The abilities attributed to the biblical God is in many ways an amalgamation of the many gods who came before him, where in the past there was maybe one god who created the world and another who put life on it. In the Bible, you have one god doing it all. The old style religions are often called naturalistic. The gods represented nature, life, and so on. If there was a thunderstorm, it was because Thor was swinging his hammer. If there was a storm at sea, Neptune was angry, and so on. Keeping the gods happy was important, but you didn't always know what they wanted. With the monotheistic gods, the focus is more on morality and ethics. Live in accordance with the word, and you shall find salvation through fire, burning, and death. That said, even Catholicism has hero worship in the form of the saints. The saints are in some ways similar to the Greek heroes in that they are mortals who inhabit some miracle or greater power. The issue with Dungeons & Dragons gods is that they are very low-resolution interpretations of both the old-style naturalistic gods as well as the more moralistic gods, with very little thought put into how these gods interact and why. They are assigned good, evil, chaotic, and lawful alignments and given planes to live on, but that's really all about it. There are some cool stories to be found within the different settings, though. For instance, you have a god whose job it is to make sure the souls of the dead go to the realm of their respective god. The issue with this is that the world seems to be built around each person only holding one god for themselves, even though all the gods seem to inhabit the same pantheon. Even the elven and gnomish gods exist alongside the human ones. This is very contrary to how the older religions worked. In Polytheism, people believe in all the gods of their pantheon, and they pray and sacrifice to the fertility god when they want to have a child, and to the war god when they go into battle. Only cultists and religious leaders would probably hold on to one god closest. Furthermore, there's really not such a thing as a good or evil god in the polytheistic religions. They all have their jobs, and they do them accordingly. For example, Loki in Norse mythology wasn't really evil. That's just something attributed to him by Christian scholars who documented the old religion and likened him to Satan. Loki was just a trickster, which made him often do things we judge to be, well, evil. He's a god you might sacrifice to in order to have him stay away from your wedding, etc. This is why I find having gods like the Dead Three and the Forgotten Realms to be somewhat silly. You have the gods of murder, death, and misery, or whatever the hell it is. They are pure evil. Why would anyone actually worship them? Not just sacrifice to them in order to keep them away, but worship them? It's quite comic book villain, isn't it? In either case, the reason they are gods is because they are beyond human, they have more powers than humans, and exist in a plane outside of the material. They can affect human lives through their actions and often do. They aren't very well written gods for the most part, but they serve their purpose well enough. Ooh, this is a great question. I'll direct you to the first dictionary where we find the definition of God. Number 1. In Christianity and other monotheistic religions, the creator and ruler of the universe and source of all moral authority, the supreme being. Number 2. In certain other religions, a superhuman being or spirit worshipped as having power over nature or human fortunes, a deity, a moon god. Clearly, number 2 is the definition used in these games, but why? I'll post my ideas as both a Christian and game designer. Fear of favoritism. If one puts in the Most High God of Israel, one runs the risk of alienating non-believers. In fact, it may come across as proselyting, which is a great way to kill sales. The Christian God is, well, overpowered, even by divine standards. In the Hellenistic model favored by definition 2, no one God is responsible for all creation. But this one is. No one God has access to all knowledge and power. But this one does. It's the divine equivalent of Superman, without kryptonite. There's nothing this god can't do. And that makes for boring stories. Whereas pitting gods against each other makes for Homeric epics. No desire to be blasphemous. The opposite of A. I respect my god and don't want to put them, even fictionally, in a situation where they were to be mocked or abused by others. Those who claim these games are satanic would feel no differently if their god was included on the box cover. Ultimately, it all comes down to the fact that these games are fiction, but my religion is real. There is compartmentalization here. As a player, I do ponder the moral decisions my characters make. For instance, in Skyrim, I only attack people who will attack me, and I leave well enough away from chickens. I very rarely join the Dark Brotherhood because, well, I, the player, don't feel comfortable playing a character like that. In tabletop games, though, I play a cleric who believes in the unknown god, as the Hellenists put it. A quiet, sneaky way of introducing the Most High into a campaign without hitting people over the head with my beliefs, and providing enough mystery that the omni-everything doesn't come off as overpowered. Hey everybody, Brian Von VA checking in after the vid. Please make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and of course to ring that bell to get notified whenever we post a brand new video. And if you would like to contribute to this discussion, you can do so in the comments below. All the love, everybody.